I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the for sale sign staked into the middle of my farm. It wasn't mine. I hadn't put it there. And yet, there it stood, bold and taunting, as if daring me to challenge it. I slammed my truck door shut and marched toward the sign, yanking it out of the ground with enough force to snap the wooden post in half. My name, Xander McAllister, was nowhere on it. Instead, it had the logo of the local real estate office and a small banner stating sold. Sold. I owned this land, had owned it for 15 years. It was outside the HOA's jurisdiction, or so I had thought. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the sign. The agent picked up on the third ring. "Hi, this is Cheryl with Willow Creek Realty. How can I help you?" "Yeah, Cheryl, you can start by telling me who sold my land without my permission," I said, barely keeping my temper in check. There was a pause. "Sir, the sale was processed through the Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. Are you saying—" "I don't care what the HOA says," I interrupted. "This land isn't under their control." Another pause. "Sir, I was under the impression that this land was annexed into the HOA 6 months ago. The board approved the sale last week." My grip on the phone tightened. Annexed. No one had told me anything about this. I didn't waste another second. I jumped back into my truck and sped toward the HOA office. 15 minutes later, I stormed through the glass doors of the small beige building that housed the Willow Ridge HOA. Behind the front desk sat Regina Zeller, the self-important president of the HOA, a woman who had made it her life's mission to control everyone in the neighborhood. She looked up from her computer, her sharp eyes narrowing as she saw me. "Mr. McAllister," she said, her voice dripping with that fake politeness she always used when she was about to ruin someone's day. "How can I help you? You can start by explaining why the hell my land was sold without my permission." She sighed and folded her hands neatly on the desk. "Xander, there's no need to raise your voice. The HOA approved the annexation of your property months ago. It was all done legally." "Legally," I scoffed. "I never signed anything. I never agreed to be part of your HOA. You can't just steal my land and sell it." Regina pursed her lips. "Actually, under the revised community guidelines, any land bordering HOA property can be annexed if the board votes unanimously. We sent notices." "Like hell you did," I shot back. "I never got a single letter, email, or phone call." She waved a manicured hand. "It's not our responsibility to make sure you check your mail. The sale has already gone through." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Who bought it?" "That information is confidential." I let out a bitter laugh. "Wrong answer, Regina. You just made a very big mistake." Her expression faltered for a brief second, but she quickly recovered. "If you have concerns, you're welcome to file a complaint." I leaned in, lowering my voice. "Oh, I'm going to do a lot more than that." I turned on my heel and walked out, my mind already working through my next steps. I wasn't just going to get my land back. I was going to burn the entire HOA to the ground. Xander didn't waste time. He drove straight to the county clerk's office, his hands gripping the wheel tighter than he realized. If Regina and her band of HOA crooks thought they could steal his farm without a fight, they were about to learn otherwise. Inside the government building, the air smelled of old paper and coffee. Xander strode up to the records desk, where a young clerk with thick glasses glanced up from his computer. "I need to see recent property transfers involving my land," Xander said, keeping his voice measured. The clerk adjusted his glasses. "Address." Xander provided it, and the man typed quickly. After a few moments, his brow furrowed. "There's a transfer of ownership recorded just last week. It was filed under Willow Ridge HOA, then sold to a private buyer the day after." Xander leaned forward. "Who's the buyer?" The clerk hesitated. "Looks like a corporation, Silver Pine Developments." He had never heard of them, but that didn't matter. The fact that the HOA had sold it so quickly meant they were rushing to cover their tracks. "Who signed off on the annexation?" The clerk clicked a few more times. "Regina Zeller, Kevin Martinez, and Linda Brooks from the HOA board. Approval was filed 6 months ago." Xander clenched his jaw. "And where's my signature?" The clerk scrolled. "It doesn't look like you signed anything. It just says unanimous board approval." That was all he needed to hear. The HOA had pulled this off without his consent, meaning they had likely forged or misrepresented legal documents. Print everything, Xander said. I need copies. Minutes later, with a thick stack of paperwork in hand, he left the office and made another call. This time, to someone who could actually do something about it. An hour later, Sheriff's Deputy Cole Hensley stood with him in front of the HOA office. Cole was an old friend, a no-nonsense officer who had grown up knowing exactly what kind of trouble HOAs could cause in rural areas. "You're telling me they annexed your land without direct consent?" Cole asked, flipping through the documents. "That's exactly what they did," Xander confirmed, "and they sold it. That's fraud, Cole." Cole nodded. "Let's see how they explain this." They stepped inside. Regina was at the desk again, her polished nails tapping against the surface as she saw Xander walk in this time with a sheriff's deputy beside him. Her expression flickered, but she forced a smile. "Mr. McAllister, back so soon?" Her eyes shifted to Cole. "How can I help you today, Deputy Hensley?" Cole didn't waste time. "We need to discuss the legal transfer of Mr. McAllister's property. He never signed any annexation agreement, which means this sale wasn't lawful. We need to see all the paperwork you filed." Regina's smile tightened. "I'm afraid that's confidential HOA business." Cole crossed his arms. "Not when it involves fraudulent transactions." Regina hesitated for just a second too long. "I assure you, everything was done according to regulations." Xander stepped forward. "Then show us the documents proving I signed off on this." Regina's gaze flickered to the side as if calculating her next move. "I'd have to check our records." Cole's voice was firm. "Then check them." Regina gave a forced laugh. "Well, that could take time, Deputy. We have a lot of paperwork and our files are—" Cole cut her off. "Then I suggest you start looking, because if Mr. McAllister's name isn't on those documents, we're looking at potential fraud charges." Regina's confidence wavered. She turned slightly, glancing toward the back office where the HOA board members frequently met. Xander caught the movement. "What's in there, Regina? The real paperwork." She straightened. "I need to consult with the board before releasing any records." Cole exhaled sharply. "That's not how this works. If you don't produce documentation proving McAllister's consent, we escalate this to an official investigation." Regina's lips pressed together. "I'll see what I can find." She disappeared into the back office. Xander and Cole exchanged a look. "She's stalling," Xander muttered. "Definitely," Cole agreed, "and that means there's something worth hiding." Minutes passed before Regina returned, a thin folder in her hands. She placed it on the desk and slid it forward. "There you go, all legal and binding." Cole picked it up, flipping through the pages. Xander leaned in, scanning the documents. Then he saw it, his name, but not in his handwriting. Xander picked up the paper with mock curiosity. "Well, look at that. Seems I signed this document 6 months ago." Regina clasped her hands. "Exactly. As I've been saying, this was all legitimate." Xander turned to Cole. "Only problem is, I was out of the state 6 months ago. I was in Montana, dealing with my father's estate. I have travel records and bank statements proving I wasn't even in the county when this was allegedly signed." Regina's face blanched. Cole set the folder down. "So we have a forged signature on a legal document authorizing the sale of property. That, Regina, is fraud." Regina opened her mouth, then closed it again. Xander crossed his arms. "You want to explain how my signature magically appeared on that paper, Regina?" She swallowed hard. "I don't handle the paperwork directly. Maybe there was a clerical error." Cole pulled out his notepad. "I think we'll need to bring in the other board members for questioning. And depending on what we find, you might be looking at criminal charges." Regina's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the folder. I need to speak with our legal team." Cole raised an eyebrow. "You do that. In the meantime, I'd suggest you prepare for a formal investigation." Regina's face was ashen. Xander stepped closer. "You tried to steal my land, Regina, and now you're going to pay for it." Cole tucked away the fraudulent document. "We'll be in touch." As Xander and Cole stepped outside, the tension in the air was thick. But Xander felt something else brewing satisfaction. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the HOA had just made the worst mistake of their lives. And now, they were going to regret ever crossing him. Xander watched Regina retreat into her office, her carefully composed mask cracking under the weight of the fraud she'd just been caught in. Cole tucked the forged document under his arm, his expression unreadable. Outside, the heat of the afternoon settled over them as they walked to Xander's truck. Cole leaned against the hood, flipping through his notepad. "You know this isn't just about your land," Cole said. "If they forged your signature, they've probably done it to others." Xander exhaled sharply. "Wouldn't surprise me. The HOA's been pulling shady moves for years, but this is a whole new level." Cole nodded. "I'm going to start digging. I'll pull records for the last few years, see if other properties were annexed the same way." Xander's jaw tightened. "Good. Because I'm not just getting my land back, I want them in court." Cole closed his notepad. "You might get your wish. Fraud like this, it's a felony." Xander climbed into his truck. "Let me know what you find." As he pulled away, his mind was already working through the next step. He needed a lawyer. A damn good one. The next morning, Xander sat across from Victoria Langley, a sharp-eyed real estate attorney known for tearing corrupt HOAs apart in court. Her office was sleek but functional, no unnecessary decorations, just shelves packed with legal volumes and a single coffee cup marked "I sue HOAs for fun." Victoria flipped through the forged document, her expression darkening. She tapped a red manicured fingernail against the paper. "This is blatant fraud," she said. "They didn't just annex your property illegally. They sold it within 24 hours, which tells me this was premeditated." Xander leaned forward. "What's our next move?" Victoria sat back, folding her arms. "First, we file an injunction to freeze the sale. If the new buyer tries to develop or sell it again, they'll be violating court orders. Then, we file a lawsuit against the HOA and the board members personally. Fraud, forgery, and illegal property transfer." Xander's lips pressed into a firm line. "How long before we get them in court?" Victoria considered. "Depends on the judge, but with the evidence you have, we can push for an emergency hearing within a few weeks." Xander nodded. "Make it happen." Victoria's eyes gleamed. "Oh, trust me, I will. I love taking down corrupt HOAs." By the end of the week, the HOA board found itself slapped with legal papers. Regina's carefully curated control over the neighborhood was cracking, and it showed. The next HOA meeting was packed. Homeowners filled the small community center, murmuring among themselves. News of the lawsuit had spread fast. Xander stood toward the back, arms crossed, waiting. Regina stepped to the front of the room, her usual confidence dimmed. Kevin Martinez and Linda Brooks flanked her, both avoiding eye contact with the crowd. Regina cleared her throat. "I want to address the recent allegations against the HOA. Certain individuals have accused this board of misconduct regarding property annexation." A man near the front, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, stood. "You mean fraud? Because that's what it is, Regina." Regina's lips thinned. "No illegal activity has taken place. The annexations were done in accordance with community guidelines." Xander stepped forward. "Then why does my signature appear on a document I never signed?" The room fell silent. Homeowners turned to look at him, then back at Regina. Regina hesitated a fraction too long. "There may have been clerical errors," Victoria, sitting beside Xander, stood. "Miss Zeller, are you claiming that the notarized document was an accident? Because forgery is not a clerical error, it's a crime." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Regina's hands clenched. "This meeting is not a courtroom. If Mr. McAllister has concerns, he should take them through proper legal channels." Victoria smiled coolly. "Oh, we have, but this community deserves to know the truth. Your HOA has been illegally annexing properties for months, forging signatures, and selling land without owner consent. And you, Miss Zeller, are personally named in the lawsuit." Regina's face went pale. Kevin Martinez stepped forward. "We acted in the best interest of the community." "These decisions weren't made lightly," Xander cut him off. "You stole my land." More voices rose from the crowd. "Did you do this to others?" "My cousin lost her house last year. Did you forge her paperwork too?" "This is corruption." Regina raised her hands. "Enough." "This meeting is adjourned." She turned, storming toward the exit, but found her path blocked. Cole stood in the doorway, arms crossed, badge gleaming. "Going somewhere, Regina," she swallowed hard. I have nothing more to say." Cole stepped forward. "Good, because I have something to say." He pulled out a small recorder. I just got off the phone with the county fraud division. They found 3 more homeowners whose signatures were forged on annexation documents. That's a pattern of criminal activity. Regina's breath hitched. Cole continued. I'd suggest you stick around because I have a warrant for all HOA records, and if I find more forged documents, he smiled without warmth. You won't be running an HOA anymore, you'll be sitting in a courtroom. The room erupted. Homeowners shouted questions, accusations flying. Regina's hands trembled. Xander stepped closer. You tried to steal from me. Now you're going to pay the price. Regina turned, looking for an escape, but there was none. The walls were closing in, and this time she wasn't the one in control. Regina's breath came in short, shallow bursts as the weight of the accusations bore down on her. The room buzzed with angry voices. Homeowners who had once followed her lead without question now turned on her, demanding answers. Kevin and Linda stood stiffly beside her, their faces tight with barely concealed panic. Cole stepped forward, his boots heavy against the polished floor. The folder containing the fraudulent documents was tucked under his arm, and his eyes locked onto Regina with the kind of patience that came from knowing justice was inevitable. Xander watched her closely. She had ruled over this neighborhood for years, manipulating, intimidating, and bending the rules to her will. But now she was cornered, and like any trapped animal, she was looking for a way out. Kevin finally spoke up, his voice strained. This isn't what it looks like. We acted within the legal framework of the HOA. Any misunderstandings can be clarified once we consult legal counsel. Victoria's expression didn't waver. You'll have plenty of time to clarify in court, but right now we're dealing with criminal fraud. She turned to Cole. What's next? Cole flipped open his notepad. The county fraud division has already started reviewing past annexations. If they find a pattern, we're looking at a full-scale investigation, and considering the forged signatures we already have, that's enough for charges. Regina's hands clenched at her sides. This is outrageous. You have no proof that we knowingly engaged in fraud. Xander let out a dry laugh. So my signature just magically appeared on a contract I never saw. You expect anyone to believe that? Linda shifted uncomfortably. Maybe there was a clerical mistake. Maybe the paperwork wasn't properly reviewed before being filed. Victoria's gaze sharpened. A mistake that just happened to result in thousands of dollars in illegal land sales. Convenient. Kevin exhaled sharply. All right, let's say for a moment that someone did make an error. That doesn't mean we committed fraud. You can't prove intent. Cole's voice remained steady. Intent is irrelevant when the law is broken. The moment you filed forged documents, you crossed a line, and considering the number of properties involved, this isn't going away. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several homeowners exchanged uneasy glances. A woman near the front, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, pushed her way forward. My husband and I were told we had to sell our extra lot because it was annexed. We never agreed to that. Are you saying our signatures might have been forged too? Cole nodded. We'll need to check. If you have any doubts, we can review your paperwork. A man beside her, his face red with barely contained fury, spoke up. I lost my rental property last year because of them. They forced me to sell, claiming it was part of the HOA now. I never agreed either. The murmurs grew into angry shouts. Xander folded his arms, waiting for Regina to respond. She had built her kingdom on fear and deception, but now the foundation was crumbling beneath her. Regina's voice tightened. I will not stand here and be accused without due process. Victoria's smile was razor sharp. Oh, you'll get due process, in court, and considering the number of homeowners coming forward, you're going to have a very long legal battle ahead of you. Linda's face drained of color. We need to talk to our attorneys. Kevin gave a stiff nod. We won't be making any further statements without legal counsel present. Xander's eyes narrowed. You should have thought of that before you stole from people. Cole straightened, his expression unreadable. I'll be submitting my report to the county prosecutor. I suggest you all prepare for some difficult conversations. Regina's composure finally broke. This meeting is over. She turned sharply and strode toward the back office, Kevin and Linda scrambling after her. The moment the door slammed shut behind them, the room erupted into chaos. Homeowners shouted, demanding explanations. Victoria turned to Xander. This is just the beginning. They're in damage control mode, but they don't have a way out of this. Xander exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Good, because I'm not stopping until they pay for what they've done. Cole nodded. And they will. The county isn't going to let this slide. Fraud at this level. That carries serious consequences. The realization settled over the room. For years, the HOA had operated unchecked, believing themselves untouchable. But now their power was unraveling. And Xander, he wasn't just going to take back what was his. He was going to make sure they never did this to anyone again. Xander stood just outside the HOA's meeting hall, the evening air thick with the lingering energy of the chaotic gathering. Homeowners still clustered in small groups, voices heated as they digested the reality of what had been happening under their noses. The HOA's iron grip had finally slipped, and now the community was stirring in a way it never had before. Victoria adjusted her coat, her gaze sharp as she assessed the crowd. They're rattled, but they're not done yet. People like Regina don't go down without exhausting every dirty trick in the book. Xander nodded, his jaw tight. Let them try, they won't find a way out of this one. Cole finished a quick conversation with a few homeowners, then joined them. The county prosecutor is reviewing everything we sent over. Might take a few days, but with the number of forged signatures popping up, this won't stay a civil case for long. Xander exhaled slowly, the weight of the fight still heavy on his shoulders. What's the next move? Cole glanced toward the HOA office. They'll stall, probably try to manipulate homeowners into defending them, might even claim this was all some clerical mistake. Victoria scoffed. They can claim whatever they want. The evidence speaks for itself. A man in his 60s, wearing a worn flannel shirt, approached. His expression was lined with worry. McAllister, I heard what happened to your land. I think they might have done the same to my brother's property. He passed last year and I was supposed to inherit his house, but the HOA told me it had already been absorbed into the association. They claimed he signed off on it before his passing. Xander's hands curled into fists. Did you ever see the paperwork? The man shook his head. They wouldn't show me anything, just said it was all handled legally and that I had no claim. Victoria's eyes darkened. Give me his name, I'll pull the records first thing in the morning. The man nodded gratefully, then stepped back into the murmuring crowd. Cole sighed. This is getting bigger by the minute. If they've been doing this for years, there's no telling how many people they've robbed. Xander's shoulders squared. Then we make sure every single one of them gets justice. The next morning, Xander sat across from Victoria in her office while she sifted through another pile of documents. The coffee on her desk had gone cold, but she hadn't touched it in hours, too focused on what she was uncovering. This isn't just a case of overreach, she said finally, setting down a file with a thud. They've been running a full-blown real estate scam. They annex properties, forge signatures, sell them to developers, and pocket the profits under the guise of community improvement fees. Xander's stomach tightened. And no one caught them before now. Victoria's expression was grim. They were careful. They targeted properties where owners weren't paying close attention, elderly residents, people who had inherited land, folks who lived out of state. They forged documents, manipulated zoning loopholes, and bullied anyone who questioned them. Xander's grip tightened on the armrests of his chair. How do we stop them before they try to cover their tracks? Victoria tapped the folder. We file a motion with the court to freeze all HOA property transactions immediately. That prevents them from selling or transferring anything while the case moves forward. Xander nodded. Do it. Victoria picked up her phone. I'll call the judge now. This ends today. By midday, Xander and Cole were back at the HOA office, this time with a court order in hand. The moment they stepped inside, Regina's face twisted with barely restrained fury. You have no right to barge in here and interfere with HOA operations, she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Cole handed her the document. This is a court-ordered freeze on all HOA property transactions, effective immediately. Regina's hands shook as she read through the order. This is absurd. You're crippling the HOA's ability to function. Xander crossed his arms. You mean crippling your ability to steal from people. She slammed the document onto the desk. You have no proof that we did anything illegal. Cole's voice remained steady. The county prosecutor disagrees, and they'll be conducting a full audit of every property transaction your HOA has overseen in the past 5 years. Kevin and Linda, who had been standing stiffly behind Regina, exchanged nervous glances. Regina jabbed a finger in Xander's direction. You're just trying to destroy this community out of spite. Xander let out a dry chuckle. Funny, I thought you did that when you started stealing people's homes. Linda finally found her voice. We should consult legal counsel before saying anything else. Cole nodded. Good idea. You'll need it. By the afternoon, the news had spread like wildfire. The HOA's assets were frozen, their fraudulent activities exposed, and homeowners were demanding resignations. Xander stood on his farm, looking out over the land that was almost stolen from him. The fight wasn't over yet. The legal battle would take time, but the tide had turned. The HOA was crumbling, and justice was finally catching up with them. Victoria's car pulled up next to his truck, and she stepped out, holding another stack of legal papers. Regina's lawyer just reached out. She's panicking, wants to negotiate. Xander tilted his head. Negotiate what? Victoria smirked. A way out. She's willing to resign and testify against the rest of the board in exchange for a lighter sentence. Xander exhaled a slow, satisfied breath. Let her squirm. The community deserves to see her face accountability. Victoria nodded. Then we let this play out in court. Xander looked back at his land, the soil rich and untouched. Good, because I'm not settling for anything less than seeing them pay for every single person they stole from. Victoria's gaze followed his, and they will. Xander knew she was right, because this time the HOA had finally met someone they couldn't control. Xander leaned on the fence post at the edge of his farm, watching storm clouds roll in from the west. The air was thick with the scent of rain, a welcome shift after the dry summer. His rightful land stretched out before him, untouched by the greedy hands of the HOA. For now. Victoria had left a few hours earlier, her parting words still fresh in his mind. Regina was desperate, willing to throw the other board members under the bus to save herself. That meant things were falling apart faster than expected. A truck pulled up on the dirt road leading to the house, its tires kicking up dust. Cole stepped out, a heavy folder tucked under his arm. His expression was unreadable, but the way he adjusted his belt told Xander something new had come up. They met halfway, the wind picking up around them. We've got something bigger, Cole said, handing over the folder. The county fraud team dug deeper. Turns out, this isn't just about your land. It's been going on for years, and we found something that's going to end this for good. Xander flipped open the folder and scanned the first page. His eyes narrowed at the list of transactions, each one detailing a property annexed, sold, and transferred within days, sometimes hours. The amounts were staggering. That's a lot of money, Xander muttered. A little over $2 million, Cole confirmed. Regina and her cronies have been funneling the profits through shell companies. Silver Pine Developments, it's a front. Regina's husband is listed as an executive. Xander let out a low breath. So they weren't just stealing land, they were laundering money through fake sales. Bingo, Cole said. And now, with Regina ready to flip, the county prosecutor has enough to move forward with a full criminal case. They're preparing arrest warrants. Xander shut the folder. How long until they move? Tomorrow morning, Cole said, early. We want them caught off guard before they can hide any more evidence. Xander nodded, his grip tightening on the folder. Good, I want to be there when it happens. Cole hesitated for a beat, then nodded. I figured you would. The storm finally broke as night settled over the town. Heavy rain drummed against the metal roof of Xander's house, but he barely noticed. He stood by the window, watching the distant lights of the HOA office, knowing that by this time tomorrow, everything would change. By dawn, he was in his truck, following Cole toward the HOA building. The streets were quiet, the early morning still untouched by the usual hum of traffic. When they arrived, several sheriff's vehicles were already parked outside. Deputies moved with quiet efficiency, speaking in hushed tones as they prepared to enter. Cole checked his watch. We give them 5 more minutes, then we go in. Xander exhaled, steadying himself. He wasn't nervous, he was ready. When the time hit, Cole signaled to his team and they moved in. The glass doors of the HOA office swung open as the deputies poured inside. Regina was at her desk, a cup of coffee half raised to her lips when she saw them. Her face drained of color as she stood abruptly. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Cole stepped forward, holding up a warrant. "Regina Zeller, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." Kevin and Linda emerged from the back office, their faces slack with shock as deputies moved toward them as well. "Wait," Kevin stammered, backing up. This is a mistake." Linda shook her head frantically. "We were following the guidelines. This can't be legal." Cole nodded to his deputies, and within seconds, Regina's hands were pulled behind her back, cuffs snapping into place. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "I was going to cooperate." Cole met her eyes. "You had your chance." Xander watched in silence as they were led outside, escorted into waiting patrol cars. The onlookers, homeowners who had gathered as word spread, were quiet at first. Then, a voice in the crowd broke the silence. "How does it feel now, Regina?" Laughter rippled through the group. Someone clapped, then another. The tension shattered, replaced by a wave of satisfaction. Xander turned to Cole. "What happens next?" "They'll sit in jail while the case moves forward," Cole said. "With the evidence we have, they won't be seeing the outside for a long time." Victoria arrived a few minutes later, stepping up beside Xander as the patrol cars disappeared down the road. "Well," she said, brushing rain from her coat. "That was satisfying." Xander let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Yeah, it was." Victoria gave him a sideways glance. "You know, the HOA is going to need new leadership." Xander chuckled. "Not my problem." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" Xander looked around at the gathered neighbors, the people who had been manipulated and stolen from. They weren't just homeowners, they were a community. He exhaled. Maybe it was his problem. But for now, he was going home, to his land. His farm. And for the first time in a long while, it truly felt like his again.